what we're going to talk about today is the past, the history, how to break free from the past. Yeah, I really like that when you sent that to me as a message, because certainly personally, that's been a huge part of my awakening. Let's use that phrase.
We're getting very woo-woo here, aren't we?
I know, a very woo-woo phrase so early on in the session, but I'm going to go with it. Because there was a point where I had to acknowledge that actually I was completely chained up and confined by my experiences in the past. So I loved that suggestion. So
I think we all are, to be fair. I think there are lots of aspects of our life where we lock ourselves into our past, and it subconsciously, particularly, we make decisions based on our past, and have quite a lot of self-limiting beliefs, I think, around what we can do based on our experience, which is a natural, it's kind of natural, isn't it? Because our experience shapes how we navigate the world, but it's the emotional interpretation though, isn't it?
It is. So I first came across this idea, it was about, what are we? I would say 10 to 12 years ago, when I was having to deal with some very dark moments, and somebody introduced me to NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. And although it wasn't something that has sort of grabbed me and wanted me or caused me to want to become an NLP practitioner, and of course there's lots and lots of people who are and who love it, I very much liked a lot of the principles that are wrapped up in NLP, and the key one is in that word programming, because I think that's what the past is all about. It programs you. And like when I sort of understood that principle, it's like I just went, wow, it was like I could feel my brain going, wow. And I started to understand so much about my own behaviors in particular, and why I had shown up the way I did for, pretty much for all my life, and it was all wrapped up in my programming, that those past experiences and things that had been imbued into me by various people. So how do you think this affects? So obviously what this show is predominantly about, how it affects people professionally, so in their businesses or in their careers. How do you think the past shows up in the way people act professionally?
I think, so for me, I think experiences and memories of things that are happening in the business world stick with you, just like they do in any other circumstance. And I think the challenge is there is an inclination to adopt that experience, the feeling that experience gave you, and take it on as a part of your identity, and define yourself with it. And so, if you get people that have a bad experience with something, it's quite common for them to adopt the belief that they are bad at something, or bad at a particular area of business.
I mean, have you got an example you could give without
closing? I mean, I've worked with people that have been very good at opening doors, but not very good at closing sales. And I think sometimes when the MD of the business at the time told that person, well, you're just not very good at closing. And you need someone else to do that for you. And I get that everyone plays to their strengths, but and there was it wasn't coming from a negative place. It was coming from a place of, let's create a solution. But I think on the flip side of that coin, the impact that has on the individual is you're not good at this. And people then adopt that and take it on with them. When they go into their next job, they go into their next circumstance, they go, well, actually, I'm not very good at that. It becomes a sense of themselves, sense of identity.
It's so true what you've just said. And I've got some personal examples that affected me in exactly that way. But before I get onto that, I think you've also hit on something really, really important there, is that, we tend to think of programming, or it can be thought that our program is something that happens very early on in life, and it does.
Yeah,
And,
of course, yeah.
some of there's some research out there, psychological research, saying that, by the time we're 7, we're sort of 60 to 70% of who we're going to be is set by the time we're about 7.
Yeah.
So, it's from then on in, there's only about 30% of us that evolves from that time, based on the sort of experiences. But I think the point that sort of comes out of it, and do you know how old that person was who, when the MD said that?
He was early 30s.
So in his early 30s, and even at that age, you can still find yourself being programmed by what someone else says.
Yeah, what was interesting, I think, and this will tell you the impact. So that person had built the business themselves successfully.
Yeah.
And brought in an MD to take over the running of the business. Wow. So he'd built that business from scratch.
Wow.
And then his confidence just completely disappeared.
Yeah.
After that.
Wow.
In terms of closing. And it's never come back, actually, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
It's never really come back.
That's huge. So that's a very powerful example. You see, what for me, I've always believed that to succeed in business, you have to be able to sell.
Yeah.
And I was brought up with the idea that being a salesman was a natural talent, or being a salesperson. You either had that talent or you didn't.
Yeah.
And that sort of came from my dad. My dad was a very good salesperson. He had it naturally. And I got my first sales job. There used to be a men's tailors, a nationwide business. Oh my gosh, I had the name then and it's gone. God, what an old age blinking syndrome that is, eh? Anyway, so I got this job in this men's tailors, and it was a Saturday job. And I'll tell you how long ago it was. I was getting paid £3 per day.
Oh, okay.
Per day, right? And on top of that, a commission on any sale I made. And if I got to £6, that was a really good day, based on commissions. And Hepworth's, that was the name. Hepworth's.
Okay.
Yeah. And but the reality was, I wasn't actually a very good salesman in the way in which they define sales. So the way in which they define sales was, someone would come in and let's say they wanted to buy a white shirt. By the time that person left, they expected you to have sold them a suit, some shoes, and a tie.
The whole outfit,
all right, or something like that. I'm exaggerating for effect, right? But it was sort of along that lines, right? And if you couldn't do that, you weren't a very good salesperson. Obviously, in technical terms, we call that upselling. It's like it's the McDonald's thing, isn't it? Can I have a Big Mac, please? Oh yeah. Do you want fries with that? Can I have a white shirt, please? Yeah. Would you like a suit with that?
Yeah, exactly.
It's that sort of it was that sort of principle. And I was told, I was about 16 at the time, you're no good. And basically they fired me. I think they got to me just before I was about to leave anyway. Then when I went to uni and I was doing the milk round interviews, and I got an interview with a company called Coates Paytons, which they were massive UK company at the time, and they had their fingers in lots of different pies. And one of them was industrial printing inks. And cut a long story short, I got offered a job, but the guy that offered me a job told me that I would be a good business to business salesperson, but I'd be no good at business like BC, selling to consumers. And I had no idea why. It wasn't like they gave me any logical feedback or positive critical feedback about that. It was just like, no, it was a label. Now, ultimately, my career panned out that way, and I got a job in media sales, and it was B2B media sales, and I was good, and I progressed. But the reality was I had no idea why I was successful, but I held on to this idea that I was no good at sales. To be honest, I've still got it a little bit.
Yeah, that sort of thing never leaves you. Not entirely. It's a bit like habits, isn't it? It's like a neural pathway that
it is.
As soon as something happens, it gets reactivated or lit up again, and you go, actually, is there some truth in that? They never disappear fully. Doesn't matter how much you work on them, I don't think.
Yeah, you see, I don't think we ask that question, is there any truth in that? I think what we do, we just go straight to the place where if somebody in a position of authority or influence over us says something, we don't say, is there any truth in that? We go, that must be true.
Yeah, and it depends where we see that sign of authority, isn't it? Doesn't it? Obviously, the example I gave you, that person brought in another individual that he held in high regard to run his business.
Yeah.
So when that guy tells him something, he assumed it was true.
Yeah. Well, this is, again, I go back to my dad. My dad used to say, if you don't know what to do, ask for advice, and find someone who does know what they're doing and get their advice, and then take that advice. And so I very much had that idea, that was the way to go about things. And of course, what I then came to realize much later, when I was really starting to think of this through my awakening, was that actually, however expert somebody is, they only have an opinion. It's only an opinion. Okay, it's an opinion that's derived from their success, and if that's how we sort of define expert, I think it's like you look at someone, have they had success? If they've had success, then they must be an expert. And I once saw a definition of expert as being somebody who can succeed at least 51% of the time. Which is a pretty slim margin, but I guess it works. And I very much lived by that. And what I came to realize, though, was when you live by that idea that you believe what experts tell you, you're disempowering yourself. You're disempowering your own view of the world, and you're putting your view of the world in other people's hands.
Yeah.
And it's an incredibly disempowering thing to do. So once I discovered that, I think I flipped. It's not that I probably listen and read more experts than I've ever done. But I don't do it from the view now that they're telling the truth.
Yeah. You're selective and you challenge.
I do it from the point of view, okay, what can I learn from that person that I can bring into the way I do things? Which is a very different way of thinking about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. So, okay, you've talked about, sales, and sales is a very common area where people are programmed to believe they're not good at selling. So they carry this sort of belief from the past. What other areas professionally do you think people carry forward beliefs from the past that affect the way they achieve in their lives?
All areas. They carry them in all areas. We've seen this emergence of a term called imposter syndrome, where people think that they're not worthy of being in the position they're in, or fear that someone's going to tap them on the shoulder and find them out.
Yeah.
I think all of that stuff comes from our past experience and our past fears and shortcomings that we've experienced, that then determine how we view ourselves and how we operate. So I think it affects everything. Sales was just an example.
Yeah.
But it affects everyone in every area, really. I just think sometimes we don't encounter an issue where that gets challenged or questioned. So we can go through life sometimes without being challenged.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we'll have quite firm beliefs, or what we think are firm beliefs, And it's just because they're not challenged. And someone can push one of those beliefs, and it can either be resilient or it can fall over on the first push.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it just depends on the path that you've gone through. But I do think everyone carries some kind of past experience that has created self-limiting beliefs about themselves and their ability to do something. And that could come from, like we've said, it can come from childhood, it can come from adulthood.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think it affects everything.
So how can you tell, right? How could someone do a bit of self-analysis and you know, at any particular moment, sort of say or ask themselves, am I carrying forward stuff from the past that's holding me back? I mean, what are some of the things that people can do from a self-awareness perspective?
I think you know, and we've used this quite a lot in the past, but the 5 why technique is quite a good one just to do that and understand why they're feeling certain things, certain emotions. Because it's if something in your past is affecting you, then it's a very emotional effect that it has on you. It's a feeling that you get when you're in that position. You know, I can't imagine the feeling. You know, the example I used when he heard that he wasn't good at closing. You know, that probably tapped into all sorts of imposter syndrome-esque feelings about himself in a particular area, despite the fact he'd built a successful business before this guy didn't come on board.
You
know, and on the flip side, like you think, well, that guy hasn't built a business.
No.
You know, he's come into a business, a ready-made business, and prior to that, he'd always been an employee.
So
you know, so there was obviously something deep-rooted there. But I think you've got to ask yourself why, and drill down and understand where that's coming from. And you know, we talked that not that long ago about like phobias and things like that. And I said exactly where my fear of spiders come from, and that's because I thought about it. Because I was sitting there going, well, actually, I've done this before, and now suddenly I can't do it. Why is that? And sort of traced it back. And you have to do that. But I think it's very difficult, even if you identify where that comes from. It's very difficult to take the power away from it, because obviously that's been ingrained in you for a long time, potentially.
Something else just came to me actually while you were talking, going, you know, referring back to that. I'm going to use it as a horrible example. You know, I think of the person that was, you know, the guy who had his confidence sucked away from him. And actually, what it really illustrated to me was, why do some people get off on putting other people down? Because what struck me was, you know, why would that MD come in and put this person down, the person that had employed him and brought him in and had faith in him? You know, what's going on in that person's head that would want to put this guy down and by telling him he's no good at selling? And the reason I'm asking that question is I've seen that happen, and I still see it happen so often. You know, it happened to me many, many times. Like, so when I was advertising director on the Daily Mirror, and the next job up was that, you know, they were looking to recruit, and I knew they were looking outside, and I went out for a drink with a guy who was my boss at the time, and they said, oh, well, we couldn't possibly you know, promote you, Dean. You haven't got the charisma for the job. You know, I was in my 40s at that time. You know, some years later, after I'd been made redundant and I was starting out on this path, and I knew that part of this path would be maybe doing something like this, you know, and then putting it out on social media. I knew it would involve having to get on stages and talk to people in various ways. And, you know, very early on, I was introduced through, and it was, I was very lucky to be taken on for a little bit of work when I really needed it. And there was another guy who was on that same project, and he was like a C-list TV celeb. And he'd had a program on Sky, and I won't go any further than that because it might lead to him being identifiable, which I don't want. But it was in the motivational space. And we were chatting, and he just looked at me and point blank said, I could never see you. I could never see you being a motivational speaker, Dean.
Yeah.
You know. Now that was about 8 years ago. 3 years ago, I was sitting with a friend of mine, someone I regarded as a good friend of mine, and we were talking about business. And I was, it might have been 4 years ago now, actually. And they're in business, and we were talking about the challenges of businesses at various stages. And this person just looked at me and said, yeah, but you know, people like you don't get big businesses off the ground. And so from my very earliest days through to very recently, I have had people giving me negative messages, which in the early days I bought wholeheartedly into. But now, thank goodness, I've learned how to turn it on its head and say, okay, that becomes part of my motivation now. You know, and the consequence of that is I've now stood on stages and had people come up to me and shake my hand and say, wow, that was amazing. That was so motivational. Thank you. You know, I have got a business up and running. All sorts of things, virtually everything that I've been told I couldn't do, because I turned it round. I mean, there's still things I've got to do. But
of course.
By no means am I trying to say that I'm the finished article, because that just, it's never true. I've still got a lot of things that I've got to achieve. But when you find a way of thinking about these things in the right way, you can turn them around, you know? Is there anything that's ever sort of been thrown your way which you've been able to turn around?
I don't know, really. To be fair, not in a business sense. I think I've shared this story with you before.
Well, share it again. It's all right.
It's quite funny, I guess, anecdotal. So when I was a kid, I was a very late starter with girls, very late starter, and I was out once. There was a lot of kids my age in the estate that I grew up in, and you know, we all went to school together, and so you know, one of the most popular girl, if you like, and I was always in with the popular kids because I was good at sport. And the popular kids tended to be good at sport as well, so I played football and various things like that. But I remember sitting there once, and there was three of us. It was the most popular girl in school at the time, and my friend, who was one of the popular kids. And she said, "It's funny, isn't it?" She said, "You're better looking than him." She said to me, she said, "But you've just got no personality."
Oh no!
And I took that with me for such a long time.
Wow.
And I mean, she, you know, and that it was just an off the cuff comment.
No, I don't think that was off the cuff. That was like laser pointed to her.
Well, you know, it was, I don't know though, because I do think, you know, back to that example with the guy that I've mentioned, I don't think he did that maliciously. I think he was coming at it from an analytical perspective and saying, how do we make the business more efficient? Because he was offering solutions of people to take over that ownership of closing. I don't think he came in to demoralize someone. I think he came in to try and release pressure.
Sorry, no, I was talking about the person who said.
Yeah, no, I agree, but I do think that she was coming at it from a not necessarily a malicious perspective. I think, you know, with kids, she doesn't realize what she's saying. You know, we're sort of
right. It depends how old. How can you remember how old you were at the time?
Yeah, probably about 9 or 10. No, actually, it would have been older. So it probably would have been about 11 or 12, something like that.
Yeah, no, I think, yeah, okay.
But
see, that's your nice kind nature coming out. You see, thinking best of people, right?
Nice guys finish last, eh?
So not true.
I was joking. I just threw that in because it's another one.
Yeah, it is.
The world's littered with these things.
Absolutely, yeah. I call them mum and dad sayings. Actually, I've got a whole list of them. So they range from things like, I mean, the classic one is. And this absolutely plays into why a lot of people aren't confident around selling. And it goes back to when you're told as a young child to be careful with strangers or not to trust strangers or, you know. So if you think about it, what is making a cold call? It's approaching a stranger.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you're told not to trust strangers.
Yeah.
You know? So
respect people's privacy, all that stuff. It plays into so many of those things.
yeah.
Plays into so many of those things.
Yeah, and not to be rude, not to be aggressive, all of those things. And there's like,
I see it within business a lot. Even the language we use within business, there's a lot of businesses that I've worked with that use this language of buy-in. We need to get buy-in, and that implies you're selling something.
Yeah.
And so that triggers that same challenge, that same barrier with the audience you're talking to when you're saying, I need you to buy into this. People go, well, that means you're selling me something.
Yeah.
And I always sort of try and encourage them to use words like alignment. We need to get alignment with this. Not, I need your buy-in.
Yeah.
But it's such a deep-rooted psychology in terms of how we view things like sales or being confident with girls.
Well, that's a selling job, isn't it? And that's, I mean, it works both ways.
It's never mastered it, but it's
that's not true. I know that's not true.
But it's maybe sound really bad there.
No, not at all.
But not at all. So you can pick up these throwaway comments or laser focus comments, and you carry them with you, and that's the problem. It's like baggage, isn't it? It's like baggage that you carry around with you.
Yeah.
And when you get to a certain age, you're kind of driving a bus full of baggage potentially, and you don't even know what's on the bus until someone pokes a case or kicks a bag and says, what's in there then?
Yeah. Great. I love that analogy. Yeah.
And it opens it all up again. And then this is what I'm saying about this sort of habitual nature of it. We have sort of neural pathways that create our habits and our automatic behavior.
Yeah.
And I think some of these fears and past experiences follow that same, that same approach where they can be quite permanent, even if they're out of sight, out of mind. You need one person to trigger it and it comes back again.
Yeah, you see, I think something may be out of sight, but I don't think it's ever out of mind.
No,
because at a subconscious level, it's always
there somewhere, isn't it?
It's always active, and what's happening is, so you were talking about limiting beliefs. So, the word that I came across, which sort of describes this, is heuristic. Have you come across the word heuristic?
No.
So it's HEURISTIC, and I think it was a word sort of coined by the computer industry when programming and algorithms got really, really, really complicated. And if a problem came up, you had two possible ways of going about it. You either like started at point A and worked your way through the whole thing until you found the problem, which I think is root cause analysis.
It's root cause analysis.
Which is an incredibly long and tedious process. Or what you do is you look at the thing that's not working and work backwards from that and try and take a shortcut. And that's the process of heuristics. And it was a word that was then coined by Daniel Kahneman when he wrote his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, because what he discovered through his research around behavioral economics and psychology was that that's the way the brain works. The brain doesn't go back to root cause. What it does is it looks at a scenario, and in an instant, using a heuristic approach, it comes up with a story that allows us to feel congruent about what's going on. So I make a phone call to try and sell my business, and I get through to the person and they say, no, just not interested, mate. Got no need for that here. Puts the phone down. I go away and think, oh God, I'm rubbish at sales. Because 25 years, 30 years ago, someone told me that I'm no good at selling.
Absolutely. When there's absence of fact, we create stories to fill those gaps. So that's what we do.
Or the other story I could have created was, okay, that was the wrong person at the wrong time. And actually they really have no need and no desire to buy what I'm trying to sell them. and actually you can't sell anything to anyone who doesn't want to buy, you know.
Exactly.
So it's on that front, just to sort of wrap that sort of story up, what's helped me get through that idea that I'm no good at selling is a lesson I learned a few years ago when I invested in some training on this, which is to say that to be a good salesperson, you got to go through a disqualification process.
Yeah.
And you want to do it as quickly as possible. And what that means is you want to identify the people who are never going to buy what you're selling and get them off your list.
Yeah,
because
it's a waste of time.
It's a waste of time. And find the people who could be interested, and then secondly, potentially have a need. And once you start having conversations at those levels and with those sorts of qualified people, actually anybody can be a good salesman once they're talking to the right people.
Yeah.
You know, and providing you're talking about something you know, love and like and, you know, believe in, anybody can be a good salesperson. And I've proven that with, you know, people that I've helped to become good salespeople now, you know, and I've proven it within myself, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think that goes back to, you know, what you were saying about the bits of baggage that we carry around.
Oh yeah, massively. I mean, you know, I drive a double-decker bus that's towing probably 4 other double-decker buses uphill. So, you know.
Can I ask why? Can I ask why? Why are you doing that?
I just like a challenge. But yeah, you know, I think everyone's got that, you know, over a single-decker bus. You know, but yeah, and it's difficult to work through. It's difficult to work through, and it shows up in lots of different ways. You know, I mean, I going back to the sales, and this isn't all about sales. I took a salesperson on once, and we brought in some skills-based training on sale, and they had to do role playing, and they'd been in the business probably 6 months, something like that. And so the role playing, they would just say, you know, pick up the phone to each other and try and sell them something. And of course, everyone else in the business in that meeting opted to sell what they were employed to sell. This one person opted to sell something completely different that was not, it was a product that we didn't sell. You know, well, it was just this whole idea of him not feeling comfortable or confident selling what he was employed to sell. And so, you know, I think, you know, we were in logistics, so it was all about relocation and stuff like that. He opted to do a role play, try to sell on sports equipment. You know, it was so we do have these little tells, and you know, you dig into them a little bit better, ask yourself why you're doing that and try and unravel it. Then I think the best chance you've got, really, like habits, is just repurposing it. You know, like you've said about you've repurposed some of the things that you've heard and turned them into motivation. And I think that's really all you can ever do, being a skeptic. I think that's all you can ever do. I don't think you'll ever fully eliminate something from your psyche, because it's there. Once it's there, it's there. I think the best thing to do is repurpose and reinforce, and you know, easily repeat that repurposing.
So I think you talked about neural pathways a few minutes ago, and I think that's another useful way of thinking about this, because the more you focus on something, the more you entrench that neural pathway, and this has been proven scientifically.
It strengthens it, doesn't it?
And so to break out of that, you have to create a different neural pathway, which basically means you've got to think about something differently. And the more you then focus on that, which is really what you're saying here, you start to build that neural pathway, and the old neural pathway, because you're not focusing on it, actually starts to disintegrate. There's always a trace pathway there. It's a bit like, you know, once you learn to ride a bike,
it's always there.
It's always there. You can always go back, or like, you know, if you learn to swim, but you haven't swum for years, you can always swim. So there's always that sort of trace of it. Or maybe if you've learned a language when you're a kid. I had this when I was, so I did French for O level. I wasn't very good at it. I think I scraped a pass. And then, I don't know, a few years ago, I decided it would be a good idea to learn Spanish, right? A gap of about 40 years, 45 years between my last French lesson, my first Spanish lesson.
Mm.
And in my first Spanish lesson, the Spanish teacher was trying to teach, you know, like the basic, you know, cat, dog.
Mm. Yeah.
And she said, okay, what's the Spanish for dog? And I gave her the French, like from somewhere in my brain.
Yeah.
Like I'd never used that word for like 40 years. And it's like, where the heck did that
Still
come
there.
from? You know,
never goes.
She looked at me like I was crazy. And I thought I was crazy, but it was like somewhere in my head, there was a connection there that the non-English word for dog was this, you know.
Yeah.
The fact she was talking Spanish was irrelevant, you know. But really, it just illustrates that point that there will always be a neural pathway there. But as long as you're focusing on the neural pathway that you want, not the neural pathway you don't want, you'll be able to build that. And the more you build it, the stronger it becomes, and it becomes a new habit and a new way of thinking.
Yeah. Easier said than done, isn't it? But
well, the thing is,
it takes a lot of work.
It takes discipline, you know, and you know, this really feeds back to the victim, non-victim mindset. You know, a lot of people, I mean, let's face it, it's easier to be a victim in life than a non-victim, because you know, you can just blame everything outside of yourself. You can blame, and then it's never your fault. And that's always an easier place to be mentally, and think, yeah, well, it wasn't my fault, you know. It was the economy, it was the government, it was my teacher, it was my dad, my mum, my friends, you know, whatever it might be. But to actually look inward and say, okay, what was my role in that?
Yeah.
And decide to do something about it. And as you said earlier, flip it. That's a much deeper thing to do, but it is the route through this.
Yeah,
it is the route through. So I used the word awakening right at the beginning, and I think that is the process. It's like when you're willing to do that, that is the awakening.
Yeah.
So I mean, as we start to wrap this up a bit, let's get into some more specifics around how this shows up in the workplace. So we've talked about sales. What about, say, I'm just picking something random, meetings, right? So a production meeting or a marketing meeting, you know, whatever.
It shows up in meetings quite a lot. And you'll always get certain people that don't contribute within meetings. And that can be a frustration, you know, when people are trying to create buy-in or alignment. But you'll always get situations in meetings where not everyone contributes, but there's always someone who will step back or go with the flow.
Or the opposite, of course, where you get those people who try and dominate a meeting.
Try and dominate it and take it over, yeah. And all of that comes from, well, it's more complex, I think, on that front. So I think that can come from a number of areas.
But how does it come from? Because, you know, the context of this is how we have to break free from the past. Yeah. So let's focus on those people who sort of sit back in a meeting, right? What's going on in there for them that causes them not to contribute when they have something to contribute? And this is the thing, isn't it? You sort of, if you've ever run a meeting and you've had people who are sitting back, but you know they've got value to add, it's the most frustrating thing. So what's going on do you think, in their heads? I mean, we can only guess here.
You can only guess. I mean, you know, ultimately there's some sort of challenge around their contribution. They either don't value what they're involved in, or they don't feel confident to involve themselves in it. Sometimes it can be a defeatist perspective where you've got another personality in there that does dominate, and they're just resigned to the fact that they're not going to get heard. There's a whole host of things, you know. Sometimes they could just get out of bed the wrong side, but in terms of the past, I think it's past experiences of that engaging in a meeting. It could be that business, it could be another business. You know, we identify with roles. You know, someone will go into a business and say, "All right, my last sales director was X," and they look at the new sales director, and there's almost like a testing that goes between them. to establish whether they're the same.
Are they similar? Yeah, absolutely.
And we do assume, you know, we assume roles all the time and label with role. You know, I assume the role of father with my son, you know, and that's a different role to, you know, fiance with my partner. So we do put different hats on, but I think we also put hats on other people.
Absolutely. And, well, that's part of the heuristic process, isn't it? It's like, you know, going back to that shortcut process that the brain has, even to the point where, I mean, this comes back to the idea that we've made our minds up about someone within like 0.5 of a second of meeting them, because the brain does a quick up and down scan. It assesses them physically, and in that assessment they said, okay, this person's like this, or in all likelihood the probability is that because they look like this, in all likelihood they are this type of person. And again, the research has been done to show that that is an evolutionary development. It is a very protective development, because if you go back to our sort of caveman days, like if you were confronted by this square-jawed like hunk of a person, you could probably guess very quickly that they were out to get you, especially if they're carrying like a club of some sort. So your brain goes, bang, that's dangerous, right? Better either fight or get out of here. And the brain hasn't evolved from that. We still do that, and the way we do it is by looking at the sort of vast storehouse of memories and experiences, and in an instant we say, okay, that relates to this experience, and that's the past and that's the past we carry with us. And it's only when you choose to start making different decisions and assessing things differently, and that's the awakening bit, that you can actually start to change how things happen for you, really. So okay, I think we've sort of done the circle on that. Is there any other aspects of the past that you think shows up professionally in people that we haven't discussed, or do you think we've done it?
I think we've covered it. I think the reality is it shows up in all areas all of the time, and it's a constant effort to recognize it and then do something about it. And break those patterns and break those cycles, because that's how you grow. And you know, and without that, we will just replay old scenarios. So
I think the last thing I'd just like to add, and this comes from having worked with a few people where basically they couldn't progress. They hit a brick wall of a past experience, and without going into any specifics, one was to do with abuse that this person had been through, and that was such a big thing, they literally couldn't get past it. And I think in those circumstances, you do have to look for therapeutic help. And there's so many different ways. You know, it could be psychotherapy, it could be aromatherapy. I mean, I'm not prescribing what sort of therapy, but in something like that, if there's been a traumatic experience which affects you at such a deep level that you actually can't break through that, then I would suggest that going for therapeutic help in some way and for healing that trauma is an absolute necessity. But if that's not the issue, then the way in which I talk about it with people I work with is, it's like, okay, that happened in the past, but we're no longer there. So let's draw a line in the sand, which is today, and say, okay, what do I want things to look like in the future? And once you make that decision, and you're not hampered by something that's been traumatic in the past, it's literally a decision to say, okay, you know, like they say in the financial ads, you know, future performance is not guaranteed by past experience, you know, and we can adopt that for ourselves. So I think that's the thing that I just like to wrap up with is like, if you've had something really shitty happen, then okay, acknowledge it, you know, don't try and hide it. And if you need to get help to heal that, some sort of therapy, there's no shame in that. There really is no shame. Not nowadays, you know, there may have been in the past, but nowadays there is no shame. Get whatever trauma is healed. But if you don't have that, draw a line in the sand, and it's like, okay, this is how I want things to be.
Yeah. I think there's a good quote, actually. It's from Jerry Maguire, which is one of my favorite films, which is every passing moment there's another chance to turn it all around.
So I love that. Yeah, I have not heard that one before. Cool. Yeah, get that one inscribed somewhere.